Land of her new and quite astonishing book, The Mayan Code, Time Acceleration and the Awakening of the World Mind. It is happening, believe you me. I read this book in manuscript, and I said this at that time, and you'll find it on the back of the book. Barbara Hand Clows has written the definitive book about 2012. This book, quite simply, is the best resource that now exists. A very wise human being has poured her heart, her soul, and her mind into these words. The Mayan Code is a great gift to us all, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. We are all struggling to understand what is happening and what is going to happen over the next 5 years. Barbara is probably one of the best placed people in the world to help us. So, Barbara, I would like to welcome you once again to Dreamland. And by the way, folks, before we go on, I just want to mention that William is going to be talking to Barbara in the subscriber section, and it's going to be a fascinating, in-depth interview with some very surprising material. So don't miss it. Hello, Barbara. How are you?
Whitley, how are you?
Well, it's great to have you back with us, Barbara. It has been, I still vividly remember some of our interviews. I'll never forget the interview on catastrophobia. I thought that book was one of the most insightful books I have really ever encountered about the human past.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that book is that catastrophobia is that I could not have written the Mayan Code unless I had brought catastrophobia in first, because it's like catastrophobia becomes a little piece in the Mayan Code, and yet it is the essential piece because it explains what's wrong with us. It explains why we're so traumatized and incapable of dealing with the stages of evolution that we're now literally being pushed to move through. And so thank goodness I got it done. You know what I mean? Because I couldn't have written this book unless I'd gotten that piece in.
And we are traumatized. The rise of fundamentalisms around the world, in the Christian world, in the Muslim world, and in the Hindu world too, to a surprising extent that we don't read about, but it's quite true, are a symptom of the problem of our inability to face what we really are, and I think is this energy
and what we're becoming, right now.
What are we becoming, Barbara?
Well, we are evolving into another whole level of the human species, and in the Mayan Code, I looked at a split in the evolutionary line. If you go back through the evolution of hominids, you'll see certain strains evolving through levels that eventually became humans, and then you'll find these other strains of hominids just going out of existence. And I'm positing in the Mayan Code that what 2011-2012 is really about is that we're going to have a split in our evolutionary line, and one of the lines that's going to split off is what I call Homo aggressus, which is the warlike human, and that we are going to be evolving into the next level, which is Homo pacem, which is the human of peace. And they're peaceful human. And this is if this is true, and I believe that it's true because I think otherwise we're not going to survive, all of us have to face all of the fears and emotional complexes that we've lived with for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. So we're just going through this just incredible level of clearance right now of emotional patterns. And one of the feel deep compassion for fundamentalists, and I'm grateful to feel compassion. They don't make me mad, because I feel so much compassion for them because I think I understand the emotional complexes that they're attempting to process.
And attempting to process it, unfortunately, through the lure of the Pharisee, in both the Muslim and the Christian worlds. In the Christian world, it's quite obvious the connection between corporate America and industrial Christianity, as I call it, is a fatal one for the Christian spirit, because it twists Christ's message around backwards and says it's to be rich and to push away the poor.
Yes, exactly. And I feel a great feeling of justice in what you say, but I also do feel compassion as I see them struggling with their inner fears and their inner demons.
Yes.
If you know what I mean. And I think, like, for example, I even feel compassion toward George Bush And that's because I read a book called Bush on the Couch, where he was psychoanalyzed by a very good analyst. And in other words, I feel like one of the things we've got to do right now is we've got to go into people and understand the way their minds are working so that we can actually assist them to let go of some of the anger and some of the violence.
Well, you mentioned compassion a number of times already, and I think it's a critically important word because the visitors showed me when I was in the process of learning, sort of going to school with them, two worlds, one a little worse off than ours and one a little better off than ours. Mm-hmm. And the one that was a little worse off had degenerated completely into a culture of blame. And in October, I believe, of 1997, it self-destructed, and it still hasn't come back to life. Yeah. The other one had evolved into a culture of compassion, mm-hmm. which was defined as a culture which sought to do for each person what they needed the most.
Yeah.
And we think, of course, since we're in a culture of blame, that, compassion is no good, because that just means people don't get punished, and we're really into punishing people.
Yeah.
However, a real culture of compassion recognizes what they actually need, whether it is punishment, support, or a mixture of those things, and gives it to them. It is nurturing rather than destructive.
Yeah, that's a great definition, because you're a father and I'm a mother, and sometimes with our kids we do have to punish them because it's exactly what they need at that moment. And it's always the most painful part of being a parent, but there are times. Well,
and children who don't get the focus of boundaries are angry always. When I see parents saying to their children, well, what do you think? Do you think that this was bad, that you hurt her or hurt him? The child doesn't know. That's the whole point. The child needs to be told. They need the boundaries. And once they have the boundaries, they begin to be able to build a conscience. But, Barbara, let's go on now. I want to get into the book a little bit, and I want to think the best place to start is this, for you to describe the alignment to the center of the Milky Way that occurred in 1998. You say it has fundamentally altered the physical and psychic field of our planet. We're into the nitty-gritty in this show. We've got plenty of time. What happened, and exactly how did it alter our physical and psychic field?
Okay, well, as you know, this is a complicated question. But
yes, I know. That's why I gave you time.
Yeah, I know. But according to astronomy, in other words, we're talking science and not what I call New Age woo-woo. According to astronomy, our solar system went into a very special alignment with the center of the galaxy sometime during 1998. And different astronomers gave different dates, but they're all relatively close. And so those of us who are interested in, the issue of, like, the solar system and the galaxy, like in previous books, I've brought up the issue that what's happening for us as humans is we're becoming galactocentric instead of heliocentric. In other words, in 1600 AD, we realized that we were going around the sun, the planets are going around the sun, and we had a sense of a solar-based reality. But now what's happening is we're orienting ourselves within the galaxy itself. And so when this alignment occurred, only a few people the astronomers were watching it. But only a few New Age researchers, consciousness researchers, were watching to see what was going on. And so fortunately for me, I was on top of that one, and there were actual physical changes on our planet when this alignment occurred, one of which was a bulge appeared at the equator of the Earth. And for the first time in 11,500 years, the land near the poles stopped rising in relationship to the equator, and the equator started to actually develop a bulge. Now, this could be seen from satellites in space. Now, the fact that the Earth actually went through a noticeable change, and then the other thing that happened during 1998 is there were some extraordinary gamma ray bursts that were just of unbelievable magnitude. And so we do have, number one, most importantly, physical evidence that this galactic alignment is creating new fields on our planet and in our solar system, and that's extremely important. And then, of course, what I do with the Mayan code is then I go into many, many details about what I think those kinds of shifts are creating. And the most specific one being I'm following the research of a Swedish biologist, Carl Johan Kalaman, who has developed an evolutionary theory regarding the Mayan calendar itself, which is what I call the Mayan code. And so according to Kalaman, we went through a major evolutionary leap in January of 1999. And in January of 1999, our consciousness actually accelerated 20 times faster than it was going from 1755 to 2011 AD. And so the critical thing to understand is, first of all, the shift occurred at the physical level in the galaxy and in the solar system. And then when this particular change in the Mayan calendar came through in January of 99, my theory is that we were physically prepared on our planet to handle the next stage of acceleration, which is called the galactic underworld. And the galactic underworld is 12.8 short years from 1999 through 2011 AD, when we are going through an evolutionary shift, Whitley, that's like equivalent to when the fish came out of the sea and started walking on the land, or when the various stages of hominid evolution occurred. And so in this case, this shift is consciousness. This shift has to do with moving back into vibratory resonance with our planet. We've been knocked out of vibratory resonance with our planet because of a series of evolutionary cycles.
Now, we have lost contact with our souls, you say. But I want to touch on something.
And Whitley, you can define your soul as vibratory resonance with the earth.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so that's exactly what it is. If we're out of vibratory resonance with our home, which is our planet, then we're out of resonance with our own souls. And what has happened, in a sense, is we have lost that connection with our souls. And then, in a sense, you could say we could think of ourselves as like the fallen angels, if you want to do that,
Like the falling angels, I always...
Falling, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk a little bit about... And by the way, you can get into this deeply in two ways. First, you can get Barbara's book, The Mayan Code. Her new book it's just terrific, and it's available. I think it's available through unknowncountry.com, through our Amazon portal, and it's available in bookstores everywhere. And I have already put my imprimatur on it, and so has Hunbat's Men, a Mayan. It's a traditional teacher. He says it's an interesting and amazing book, and he is absolutely correct. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the milieu in which we find ourselves. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the heliosphere, which Barbara just touched on briefly in a moment ago, but it's terribly, terribly important to understand what it is and why it is, why we are so much a part of it. Barbara's website, handcloud2012.com. And she is also a marvelous astrologer, and we're going to get into that as well, and into talking about her astro flashes and just exactly where we are right now astrologically. This is one of the most interesting people in the world, so you stay tuned. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. We're back talking with Barbara Hand Clows, one of my very favorite people, because if there is anybody who is going to take us in the direction of superconsciousness, which we go into in two ways. Either it's going to break you or it's going to make you. And the people listening to this radio program and subscribing especially to this website are people who want it to make them. Barbara's going to be talking to William Henry about another book of hers called The Mind Chronicles, which is mind-boggling. It's a visionary guide into past lives. That Barbara Hand Clows, according to Jean Houston, offers a brilliant and ingenious record of her inner journey into the multiple landscapes of her creative unconscious. This is a person in Barbara striving toward the superconscious state that we all seek. Now, before we left the air, Barbara, we were talking about I wanted you to tell us a little bit about the heliosphere and this extraordinary organ that is so important to our evolution. What is it exactly?
Well, the heliosphere is it's like not so much a barrier, but it's like the border between the outer reaches of our solar system and the galaxy itself. So that as we travel through space, because as you know, we move around the galactic center, our system, our sun and our planets, is enveloped in this field called the heliosphere, which is an electromagnetic field at the very reaches. So it's somewhere out there past Pluto, and it's an edge into the galaxy itself.
It's like the skin of the galaxy in a way.
Yeah,
the skin of the solar
like
system in a way.
Flying. Yeah, like an egg flying through space, and where you get to the heliosphere, you're getting to that edge, to the shell itself. So as we go through it protects us as we move through the galaxy from various things flying through space, and also energetic waves and things like that.
But this is so important, because what happens to us, this membrane of life that it surrounds us, and it affects our energy level, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And that's where astrology comes in, because we are a system of planets that are in relationship to each other within that system. And so how the planets are in relationship to the sun affects us on the Earth itself.
I always love it when my guests go where I'm taking them. And that was, of course, exactly where I was taking you, into what I consider one of the most fascinating things about your work, is that you understand why astrology works.
Yeah, I would say so. And I would say one thing that's important about astrology is that astrology is only one element of many things, our genetics and our early childhood experience and all of that. But astrology actually does read the energy fields of the planet Earth and of an individual human being. And it's something that any astrologer can read. And so from one point of view, it's the simplest way to understand something, although, as you know, astrology is quite complex. And so not understanding astrology would be like not keeping track of the weather, like ignoring the fact, that a tornado is coming, which in the form of a Saturn or a Uranus transit or something like that. So what I did with the Mayan code, which I thought was really fun, is that I have a test in the Mayan code, which is Carl Kalaman, the Swedish biologist, says that we are going through these accelerations of consciousness and evolution 20 times 20 and the book, of course, gives all the cycles. But what I did is I said to myself, okay, if there's an acceleration during the galactic underworld, which is 1999 through 2011, if that's true, then astrology ought to show it. And what I did in one of the appendixes in the book is I did an analysis of the transits, 1999 through 2011, to see if those transits could support the kind of evolutionary change that Kalaman is positing. And indeed they do. They're absolutely extraordinary. It's like the whole sky is in the middle of a symphony, 1999 through 2012.
Oh, it's absolutely amazing. And this appendix, by the way, folks, is fabulously interesting. Why don't we talk a little bit about Night 4 of the Galactic, and tell us what that is. We're in the second half of it now. What does that mean?
Well, according to Kalaman, we're working with complex things like 360-day calendars, and we won't get into that. But according to Kalaman, from 1999 through 2011, we have these 360-day days and nights. There's actually 13 of them. And so what he's saying is that if you go back through the other cycles of the Mayan calendar, you're going to find the same system of 13 days and nights. Like, for example, over 5,125 years. One of the cycles that affects all of us to an extreme degree is a cycle that he calls the national underworld, which is 5,000 years long. And that represents the whole development of history and civilization. So most of your listeners can resonate with the fact that Sumeria and Egypt and all of these ancient civilizations suddenly appeared 5,000 years ago. So what Kalaman is saying is that during 12.8 years, we have the same 13 cycles that occurred during the 5,000-year cycle, when each one of those was 400 years long. So what he's saying is during this period from 1999, each year is like 400 years of history. And that is the reason that it's so difficult to be alive right now. That's the reason that the historical cycles and the political cycles are so intense, because people are unconsciously acting out patterns that have gone over hundreds of years instead of only one short year. And this particular period that we're in the middle of right now, which happens to be day 5, by the way, night 4 was last year, and we're in the middle of day 5 right now, which is the same time period as from like 40 AD to like 400 AD, which was the synthesis of Christianity basically on the planet in relationship to the other religions that existed on the planet. So we're in the middle of what Kalaman calls the grand unifying synthesis. And so what I had to do in my book is decode, okay, well, what could happen with Christianity during one short year in relationship to 400 years of development? And it has a lot to do with understanding that Christ was married and that he was a normal human being as well as having divine consciousness. This is the issue of Mary Magdalene.
Which, of course, is one of the great themes of this radio program and website, and why we have so many guests on who talk about these things. And the reason being that it's crucial to understand that in 325 A.D., the Council of Nicaea captured Christianity away from the truth. The truth was Christ as a transfigured human being. And yes, certainly a part of God as well. But at the same time, his message is clear. The kingdom of heaven is within us. A message that since 325 A.D., Christianity, or the church, I should say, has ignored in favor of using guilt as a control mechanism. We killed Christ. We are responsible for his crucifixion. In fact, the truth is we are responsible primarily for our own transfiguration, and it is available right now.
And this is true. And then in order to feel that it's possible for us to experience transfiguration, we need to be able to identify with Christ as a human. And that's why this issue of marriage and a family and all that in the life of Christ is such a critical awakening at our time, during our times. In other words, that's why this is happening by means of Dan Brown and everybody else. It's coming forward fast.
Yes, and indeed it is. Now, let's talk about what happened. Our society has been derailed by, as you put it, scientific materialism, dogmatic history, and fundamentalist religion. And what exactly is dogmatic history? I think we understand the other two pretty well, but what do you mean by that? Because it's a very important concept.
Yeah, it's pretty simple in the sense that, as we all know, the winner always tells the story. And everybody knows that, but what people don't pay enough attention to is that they're buying the story that the winner told. And so history is just a pile of stories of reality that were invented by the winner, and then whatever the winner says turns into dogma, and that's the definition of reality, when in the meantime none of it's true. Like, for example, there's no reason for the East to have a battle with the West, or for the West to have a battle with the East. But because of what happened in the past, it has become dogma that the East and West have to have a battle, if you see what I mean. Yes.
Now, exactly, it has become dogma, and it's horrible dogma because it's so utterly and completely false.
Useful to the arms manufacturers and the corporate interests on the planet.
Now, I'm going to read from one of the appendixes to this book, to Barbara's book, and then this is going to sound like a mouthful, folks, but it's going to all become very extraordinary clear in a moment. The Galactic Underworld, January the 5th, 1999 through October the 28th, 2011, is a cycle that processes the development of civilization during the National Underworld, 3315 BC through October the 28th, 2011, and the rise of technology during the planetary underworld, 1755 through October 28, 2011. Now, first, let me ask you, what are underworlds?
Okay, this is a term that Kalaman uses for the evolutionary cycles in the Mayan calendar. The term is a Mayan term that has to do with the sense of energy coming from the depths and the dimensions of the planet, and then expressing the energy through us as human beings. So Kalaman's using a Mayan term, which I think is a very, very good idea to base this concept in the calendar as much as possible. So these underworlds, each one of them represents a cycle of time. But what Kalaman is positing is that there's 9 of them. The longest one is 16.4 billion years, which is the actual creation of the universe. And Kalaman has discovered in the calendar that these 9 underworlds are stacked on top of each other, and they're all 9 of them are culminating in 2011. And so from 16.4 billion years ago through 2011 AD, we have these 9 worlds, in a sense, of consciousness, which are still activated and which are evolving toward this culmination point in 2011 AD. And that's an absolutely astonishing idea. And the difficulty of this concept is that because of the acceleration, each one of the 9 levels is going faster than the previous level. So, for example, from 1999 to 2011 AD, we're going faster than we did from 1755 to 2011, and then 20 times faster, that.
And this is absolutely crucial, folks. Listen close. This is crucial to the way you feel and the way you live. Go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, and so it's a very difficult concept to grasp, I must say. And I want to say to the listeners, the book is easier than what I'm talking about right now, because what I was able to do in the book is I've discovered with these ideas that you kind of have to take a piece of it here and a piece of it there and kind of put it together like a puzzle, and then all of a sudden the person who got all the pieces goes, aha, I see what you mean. But essentially what we're saying here is that during one short year, from 1999 to 2011, any one of those 13 years, we're in day 5 right now, it telescopes into 20-year periods from 1755, which is industrialization development, which then telescopes into 400-year periods, and then into 7,900-year periods, and all the way back to 16.4 billion years. And it's not something anybody can grasp right now by hearing the sentence that I just uttered, if you know what I mean.
Right.
It's something, it just isn't. When I go out and teach it, I teach it intensely for 2 hours, and at the end of the 2 hours with a whole bunch of visuals and a whole bunch of ideas floating around, people start to feel it in their bodies, and then they can start to identify. But I'll tell you one thing. I'll bet you everybody listening to this has been feeling pretty weird since 1999.
Well, I'll bet that's true, and we're going to talk about that more in just a minute when we get back. Barbara Hand Clows' website is handcloud2012.com, and she mentions teaching, and you can learn. You can go to Barbara's workshops. It's easy to do. You go on her website, and you can find out all about them. You can also find out about Astroflash and all kinds of cool things. William Henry is going to be talking in the subscriber section to Barbara about an extraordinary guiding of us through 100,000 years of human history using her own in-depth experiences of initiations and sacred ceremonies. It's going to be really fascinating. So subscribers, don't fail to listen up. And if you're not a subscriber, you're missing out big time. You better subscribe to Unknown Country. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland Online.
This is Whitley Strieber. I'm talking to Barbara Hand Clows about her book, The Mayan Code, Time Acceleration and the Awakening of the World Mind. And it is crucial that we understand that time is literally changing now. And this feeling that we have that life is going past us so much more quickly is right. It is true, isn't it, Barbara?
Yes, it is, and the way I would define it as simply as possible would be that now it's going as fast as it is. And, of course, this is reflected by our technology, BlackBerries and blah, blah, blah. In other words, technology always reflects where evolution is actually going. But the fact that it's going as fast as it is now is actually breaking down our minds. And so you know how it is when you have this sort of constant inner dialogue going on in your head about a million different things in relationship to a million other things. Well, what this time acceleration is doing is it's starting to just push us into just direct apprehension and direct feeling. And so the reason it's so hard right now is when all of that stuff breaks down and all of those ideas and all of those concepts and all of those things that we carried around, it's very disturbing to have all those things break down and transmute. And yet the positive side of it is that we're starting to just apprehend one-on-one and direct. And many, many people are experiencing that. And that, I think, is what's carrying us through this, because this is a very difficult process. So individually, we're feeling that. And yet,
Yes.
as we look at the world and we look at, behavior in Iraq or whatever, what we're seeing is we're seeing all of that stuff that's been carried around in our consciousness and minds for so long. We're seeing it just explode all the time. And it's bizarre. And we see some guy like Cho go off because he just explodes like a psychological landmine.
Yes, it just blows apart. And, it's very interesting, speaking of that particular phenomenon, the first great catastrophe of an exploding person blowing up a school occurred in 1927. The second one, to which I had the misfortune to be witness, occurred in 1966. It was the Charles Whitman incident at the University of Texas. All of the incidents since have occurred since 1998. So far, 7 of them just in this short period of time, since 1998. What do you make of that, as if we didn't know?
Well, unfortunately, that's more signs of the acceleration. And when I say unfortunately, I'm going out there and teaching this stuff, Whitley, and I'm taking a lot, as you can imagine, because I'm right online. And one of the things that I'm saying to people when they start saying, well, how can this happen? How can this be right? How can this be a process that's occurring? And what's going to happen and all that stuff. What I'm saying to people at this point is that it looks to me like Americans will not realize the consequences of all the guns and all the violence until the number of people blowing themselves up in the United States every day is equal to the number of people we're blowing up in the world. Because the day that Cho shot 33 people, 200 to 400 people died in Iraq, possibly 600 people died in Iraq. And that doesn't include Palestine want to go, if you see what I mean.
It doesn't include, Barbara, there was a brief dropout. It doesn't include what?
It doesn't include like Palestine or other locations on the planet. How many people died because of American weapons manufacturers creating things that the American government, sends all over the planet and detonates? You
yes.
follow what I mean?
Well, there are American, British, French, Russian, and Chinese weapons manufacturers involved in this process, to be fair.
Yes, I agree with you. But America has led the ball game. America has decided to be empire during this particular. America has decided to be the empire during the galactic underworld. Now, the galactic underworld started in 1999, and then we have dear George Bush taking the mantle in 2000. And Europeans are watching this. The French, for instance, they've gone through being the empire, and they already know what being the empire creates, and they've already had enough of it. But we're the ones who decided to play this game. So from that point of view, America is the central vortex, and then everything is in relation to that. And, of course, all these other countries you're mentioning, such as the Soviet Union, of course, they're also manufacturing weapons.
Now, you say in your book that what's going to happen is similar, as I recall, and I'm stretching here. I'm not on the particular page. The 30 Years' War, in the latter stages of the galactic underworld, the West, the aggressors, which is primarily at this point the United States, will run out of steam, and it does appear to be happening.
Yes,
we are running out of steam. I mean, as a country, we're running out of steam because it's obvious to everyone except the president that we can't win in Iraq, and we're not going to win. The surge is a disaster.
Yeah, I'll help you with this, Whitley, because this is a difficult one. Because there's cycles within cycles, and there's another whole cycle operating here, where there's going to be a shift in August of 2008, which is, of course, next summer. And I'm predicting definitively that that's it for the. If you want to talk about the steam kettle on the stove, it's over at that point. And then what happens is the possibility for real peace starts to come to this planet. Which is shown. You can see this in the Mayan calendar, and real peace on this planet, as I've defined it, is ending the quarantine, which I'm sure fascinated you.
When you say ending the quarantine, tell us what you mean, as if we didn't know.
Right. This has to do with a subject called exopolitics, and it has to do with many, many people on the planet who believe that we live in a peaceful, creative, exquisite universe, and that there are many life forms and many other planets and many other solar systems where creativity exists, and that the Earth has been quarantined because we are so aggressive and warlike. And the Mayan Code is positing that in August of 2008, the quarantine gets lifted, and we start going back into resonance with the universe itself, and we start moving into being peaceful humans. And that's the central theme of the book and the most important point.
Well, take it from somebody who knows, folks. The quarantine is quite real, and it's also something that is quite ordinary in the universe for people in our level of development. There's nothing wrong with having go through this. Everybody does it. Not everybody does it, but most of us do in this universe. And the fact that there is so much interest in us only means one thing, and that is that we can live past the quarantine. And I think that it's possible that while there will be upheavals between now and then, that we will survive past the quarantine, and we are going to enter a new state and have the joy that is the essential promise of conscious life in this universe, to taste of that joy of being. Now, we're going to leave the air for a little while. I'm going to make some announcements pleading with you to subscribe to the site, because the actual truth is we don't do much advertising on this website except for the advertising various charitable activities that you could engage in, which I will be talking about during the break, talking about some of the books we have for sale, especially Barbara's books, which are the Mayan Code and also the wonderful Mind Chronicles, this visionary guide that William's going to be talking to her about.
You're listening to Whitley Strieber's Dreamland Online.
This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. I'm talking to Barbara Hand Clows, her new book, The Mayan Code, Time Acceleration and the Awakening of the World Mind. Her website, handcloud2012.com, a wonderful, rich, deeply engaging website, and a life that you can share, because Barbara is a teacher. She goes out and she teaches. She is available to you. Now, I want to turn to the previous times, the time before 11,500 BC, Barbara, when you postulate that the Earth was not it tilted, that it wasn't precessing, and there's a very interesting support for that. And that is that there are around the world, all on the same meridian, 14 very, very ancient sacred sites, including the Pyramid at Giza, which are all exactly the same distance from a point which is now about 1,100 miles south of the pole, which, if the Earth had not been tilted, these sites would have been oriented on the North Pole. And all of the sites are about the same. I mean, we don't know how old they really are, but they're all really, really, really old. Some of the oldest rock art that's been found is clustered at one of these sites in North Africa. And it seems to me that we were different then. We were different. And you mention in your book, the Book of Enoch, and what the pre-flood race knew. Why don't we talk about that a little bit? It's fascinating stuff.
It is utterly fascinating stuff. I agree. And fortunately, I found my way to this material because of direct access that I had previously gotten, which was, first of all, by means of doing the Mind Chronicles, in which I traveled for 100,000 years. I had direct experience of that previous world. And then I also do an anthropological technique called sacred postures, based on the anthropologist Felicitas Goodman. And in that work, we travel into that world so that I've actually had direct experience with it. And when we are in the form of consciousness that existed at that time, which Kalaman calls the regional underworld, it's the same thing as like the sense of the Garden of Eden. And when we are in touch with that consciousness, and what's important to realize is that consciousness has not gone away. We're still in touch with that consciousness. It's just that these later levels of evolution are superimposed on top of that, such as the development of civilization over 5,000 years. So when we're in touch with that consciousness, we are whole-brained, not violent, and very much in touch with it. There's no quarantine. We're very much in touch with the whole universe itself. And where that gets to be important, and this is coming from my Native American background as being part Cherokee, we have always been taught that the Earth is a feminine planet. And so when we look at the Earth from the point of view of no quarantine and being part of the universe, what happens is the Earth is understood to be a feminine planet, and the leaders on the planet Earth are the women. And so when we move back to that form of consciousness, it's not the women as the boss, like a man is the boss. It's just that the women are always respected as the sort of final say-so and final leaders.
And the emergence of the Magdalene into our culture as a vitally important phenomenon and a new window into the sacred is part of this, isn't it?
Oh, absolute necessity, because if the only access we have, and I use the word Christos instead of Christ, and I like that word because it kind of takes us back to the Christ before the church superimposed the definition of him. And so
yes.
if we work with the sense of Christos without his feminine half, none of it makes any sense at all. And that's why we've had 1,800 years of violent male oppression on the church, mainly controlled by the Vatican.
And we're going to have one civilization after another collapse as long as we're like this, as long as we're out of balance. William Henry talks about a most interesting thing, that is the wand and the ring. And he points out that before the Council of Nicaea, Jesus was often portrayed holding a wand in his hand, and this ring, which was the ring of vibration of the feminine, was represented by his wife, Magdalene. Mm-hmm. And without accepting that relationship, looking only to the male, we're looking at a lie, essentially, because it's just not true. The coming together of the wand and the ring are the essential energy of creation, and you can see it quite simply because it's where babies come from, in the most basic and natural way. But a lot else comes from this as well. And let me ask you, what did this is a question that's actually addressed in the book, in the section called Christ and the Cosmos. What did the pre-flood race know? What would life on Earth be like if we all realized, she asks, that we walk with God every day of our lives as our cells, bones, and minds evolve? What's the change going to be like inside us, Barbara?
Well, see, that's where it's just so awesome, because what this change involves is going back into vibrational attunement with the vibrational fields of the planet. In other words, during this period of time in the past, animals, humans, plants, and everything were in vibrational resonance, most importantly humans, because the plants never went out. And so humans were in total vibrational resonance with the planet itself. And then what happens, as we started this discussion, is then we are manifesting our actual souls on this planet. And so one of the things the book describes is the stages of evolution during which beings of very high consciousness have incarnated their souls into humans in order to move this process along. And in terms of what's been going on lately, we're watching the evolution by means of the indigo children, which I'm sure have been discussed on your children.
Oh, absolutely.
Higher consciousness beings are actually coming into human evolution by means of birthing. To bring in these higher vibrational resonances, and so we're living through this process happening again, and I believe it's a process that happened over 100,000 years previously.
Now, you say it happened previously, but then what happened? Why did it fail?
Well, as you know from Catastrophobia, that's why, Whitney, I'm so glad I got that book written. Because
that is a very important book, folks.
It's an essential piece, you know.
Yes.
And what it shows, and this is based on science, that 11,500 years ago, our solar system went through a trauma that was actually caused by supernova explosions in the galaxy. And we went through, basically the Earth was almost completely destroyed. The species were almost wiped out on this planet except in the oceans. And then what happened is, as humans, we couldn't cope with the intensity of this event. And we went through stages of what I call catastrophobia, which is fear of catastrophe, because the catastrophe was so horrific. And so at that time, we became a fear-based species. And as soon as we became a fear-based species, then we had to be quarantined from the universe until we went through these stages of evolution that we're going through now, so that we can move beyond fear and move back into the love. And so the idea would be that if you can imagine it, by 2011, 2012, we will have moved back into vibrational resonance, and we will be beings of love on this planet.
This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to Barbara Hand Clows. Her new book, The Mayan Code, Time, Acceleration, and the Awakening of the World Mind. Don't miss it. Her website, handcloud2012.com. Do you want this teaching? Go to her website and sign up for it, because you can do it right there. Plus, William Henry's talking to her in the subscriber section about one of the most extraordinary journeys ever taken. It's chronicled in her book, The Mind Chronicles. Don't miss it. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. I'm talking to Barbara Hand Clows. Her new book, The Mayan Code, Time, Acceleration, and the Awakening of the World Mind. Barbara, we have, let me ask you this. I think the next thing, we're just about at our time, we have about 10 minutes left, I think. Where are we, what should we expect over like the next 2 or 3 years? And also, what can we do inside ourselves? Should we meditate? How do we make this energy go in a good direction inside our own bodies and souls?
Well, first of all, meditation is becoming so essential now that I'm noticing all kinds of people who never even know, they don't even know they're meditating, and they're falling into meditation because it's gone along far enough now so it's starting to pull us into that meditative state. And it's just going to happen, and the more you do meditation and yoga and tune in and all that, the better. It's always that way anyway, but now it's like critical. But the other the other advice I'd like to give that I think is the most important advice altogether is there is going to be an economic crash at some point in relationship to these changes and transmutations of history. And the most important thing that we can do as individuals is to get out of debt and to really strengthen ourselves financially, because we're going to be called upon not only to take care of ourselves, but also to be available to help a lot of other people. And so economic strength right now is becoming a very, very critical issue in the middle of this field. And then the third thing that's important is to start reaching out and connecting up with other people who are working on these issues, because this is a group movement. One of the most important things about the Mayan Code is a group movement is building now, because unless we tune into this issue consciously and unless we decide to change ourselves year by year in relationship to these cycles, there's a point at which we're not going to accomplish a great work that we're in the middle of. In other words, it's not going to happen if we don't do it ourselves. It's kind of a simple thing. So one of the things that goes on with Hand Clows 2012, by the way, it's just free, Whitley. It's my giveaway. You don't have to subscribe. Not that I don't think we shouldn't have subscriber websites, because I think they're important. But I actually earn my living through teaching and through books. And what goes on in Astro Flash is just a counseling month by month to help us get through this.
So, and that's wonderful, and it is indeed exactly that. So don't miss handcloud2012.com. There's a lot of richness there, a great deal of richness. Now, Barbara, you have alluded to an economic crash, and it would seem almost inevitable to me that this is going to happen simply because of the way in which the economies of the world are out of balance, and especially out of balance with the environment. We have this situation where the bees appear to be dying just in droves. It's extremely dangerous.
That's right.
We have a wheat blight. None of the wheat on the planet is resistant to this blight that is coming up out of Africa and has just reached in the past few weeks England and threatens to spread around the whole planet. We've got bird flu. We've got this. We've got that. We've got.
And can I interject here?
Yeah, I'm ready for you too. Believe me.
Right. I don't want to interrupt you, but two things.
No, please do.
First of all, regarding the issue of the bees not returning to their hives, the best information I can get, and this is like one that I know is true because I resonate with truth. What's going on is they're being disturbed by cell phones and by electromagnetic waves. If you put a cell phone near a beehive, the bees will not go back into the hive. Number one. Number two, regarding the wheat blight and things like that, which of course is very scary for people to hear about, if you watch yourself closely, you may notice that unless you eat very little food, you're getting fat. There's a reason why so many people are gaining weight at this time. What's happening to our bodies as we go through this transmutation is we are needing to eat less and less and less all the time. So somewhere, and I don't know if you're noticing that, just less calories, and somewhere as the planet goes through this passage, there is a balancing. And so another thing people need to look at is eating less, living more simply, and reducing a lot of things in relationship to this level of shift.
And yet, when people are uneasy, they want to eat, or unhappy, they want to eat more. It makes you want to eat more.
Yeah, and you've got to learn that because, it's really, really unpleasant gaining weight. I mean, there isn't a single listener who wouldn't agree with that. And if you start to realize that one of the things the global elite is doing right now is making you miserable all the time by blasting images of Cho the day after the massive killing so that everybody can feel terrible. What they did last week would have been like the people showing the Columbine video 2 days after Columbine, so all of the parents of the children could see that on the media. And so they're doing everything they can to make you feel terrible. But that's where
Yes.
you got to recognize it, and you got to realize that eating is the absolute worst thing that you could do at that point because it's going to make you feel even more miserable because you're going to gain weight. So this is asking people to start to become highly conscious, not to be afraid of starving because there isn't enough wheat, but to realize that this beautiful energy that's coming in now is making it possible for us to be less material, to eat less, and to live a much, much more spiritual life.
There are many opportunities to come face to face with this amazing human being, Barbara Hand Clows. Admittedly, Barbara's going to be in Sweden through the middle of May, but in early May 4 and 5, she's going to be in Bellingham, Washington, on June the 12th in Vancouver in British Columbia, July the 15th in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and August 3 to 5 in one of my most beloved spots in the world, the Lilydale Assembly of the Spiritualist Church of America in upstate New York. If you have a chance to go to any of these, or she'll be in Anaheim on September the 16th, any of these, do not miss this. And the energy, the joy, and the pleasure of being at the Lilydale Assembly is so special because if you live anywhere around there, do visit the Lilydale Assembly and the Chautauqua Institution. They are very, very special places.
And Whitley, I'm going to be up in Seattle April 27th, this Friday night, and Portland on Saturday.
Okay, well, I'm not
So
sure
if people
that...
if they go to Hand Cloud 2012, I am going to be in Seattle on. Oh, I see. This is probably broadcast after that.
Yeah, this is broadcast after the
I
ones in April, because that's just right the next couple of days. Folks, we're just recording that. We pre-record our shows, and they usually broadcast about a week after they're recorded. So the ones she just mentioned will already have happened, but nevertheless, the other ones will not have happened. And so do not miss this chance, because it is becoming very important to be proactive in your effort. You must work on behalf of the energy in order to make it shine in a positive way in your life. If you let it go and just ignore it, then it will spin you in whatever way it happens to, and that can be bad. So these are times. This is a time of power. Barbara, you have a few more minutes. What are you going to tell us?
What would I say? I would say also that if you don't pay any attention to it, it's going to make you fat. Nobody wants to. You know what I mean? It's kind of like we don't want to be like that anymore. We're changing now, and we're going into a new level. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is, number one, to understand what's going on, and then number two, to take that understanding into a level of conscious usage.
Barbara Hand Clows, at the edge in a very positive and extraordinary way. Her new book, The Mayan Code. Don't miss, in the subscriber section, her conversation with William Henry. Next up on Dreamland, Linda Moulton Howe. Linda Moulton Howe is one of the world's leading science reporters, an Emmy Award winner. Her website is earthfiles.com. That's earthfiles.com. Don't miss the science news. You get there every day. You won't find news like it anywhere else. She gives you the facts and tells you the secrets that the others ignore. And today she's going to be reporting on a very sobering finding indeed. The Arctic Ocean, which is one of the great CO2 sinks on this planet, is filling up with CO2. Soon it will not be able to absorb any more. Linda, welcome.
Thank you, Whitley. You know, it's not even just CO2 filling up that water in Antarctica that is of concern. It is that for the very first time, there has been a melt in western Antarctica. On May 16, 2007, the Washington Post printed an editorial by three highly respected American scientists in which these words were stated, quote, "Climate change is the most critical problem the Earth has ever faced," unquote. That frank statement about global warming came from the director of the Scripps Institute of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego, the dean of the College of Oceanic and Atmospheric Sciences at Oregon State University, and the acting director of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. Their combined words came in their appeal for more NASA funding to sustain and increase the satellites now watching Earth, gathering data that describe our planet's rapid change as the Earth heats up. One of their big concerns was satellite data in January this year that showed higher ocean temperatures are reducing the growth of microscopic plants and animals that are at the heart of the marine food chain. Plankton decline would mean lack of food for a wide range of marine animals. Animal and plant extinction rates are already accelerating. Eminent Harvard biologist Edward O. Wilson now predicts that in the face of global warming, half of all plant and animal species will be extinct by 2100, and that's only 90 years away. And now comes a sobering satellite study that shows it was warm enough for a week or two in January 2005 for western Antarctic ice to melt over an area as big as the state of California. Such a huge ice melt in western Antarctica is unprecedented and could mean that global warming is even getting to the thick ice of the South Pole. Right after the release of that satellite data, The highly respected British University of East Anglia's Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research had its analysis of carbon dioxide content in the South Ocean around Antarctica published in a May 2007 the journal Science. Because the Antarctic South Ocean is so cold, it has been considered one ocean body that could keep absorbing a lot of atmospheric carbon dioxide and therefore could help balance out CO2 emissions from cars and industries. Ocean waters that absorb CO2 are called sinks. But the UK scientists found, and this is a quote, that data from 1981 through 2004 show that the CO2 sink is already full of carbon dioxide. They said, we find this really quite alarming, unquote. Up until now, the Antarctic Southern Ocean alone was accountable for 15% of the worldwide carbon dioxide sink. If that cold Antarctic water is saturated with CO2 from the atmosphere, that means that many other regions of the Earth's oceans must also be saturated. One American glaciologist who has spent the last 15 years studying Antarctic ice is Ted Scambos, Ph.D. in geology, lead glaciology scientist at the National Snow and Ice Data Center, and senior research scientist at the University of Colorado in Boulder. This week, I talked to Dr. Scambos about the implications in both the January 2005 California-sized ice melt in western Antarctica and the recent discovery that the Southern Ocean around Antarctica is so full of carbon dioxide that it won't be able to absorb much more. First, Dr. Scambos talks about the unprecedented January 2005 ice melt in western Antarctica.
It was a brief period, a week or two, where a large area of snow melted briefly and formed a thin ice layer right there in place in Antarctica. Now, what's interesting and important about it is that in many places it was unprecedented. We'd never seen anything like this in the past 25 years. Now maybe what we're seeing is the beginning of a trend for Antarctica to warm up too, and the real problem with that is that Antarctica represents a huge amount of ice and therefore sea level rise. And so if this trend were to continue over the next several decades, there might be more areas than just the Antarctic Peninsula that start to show a response to a warming trend in the form of accelerating glaciers and more meltwater coming off of the continent beginning to have an effect on sea level. And I fully expect that we'll see more ice shelves crumble away into the ocean, and I'd be real surprised if the glaciers behind them didn't accelerate. But the Antarctic Peninsula doesn't represent nearly the threat that the main landmass that Antarctica represents in terms of sea level rise. It's really the sleeping giant of this whole climate change picture and sea level rise picture. And if West Antarctica begins to warm rapidly, if we begin to see year after year, or we start to see every other year the same kind of California-sized area of melt, then we know that climate really has begun to change in Antarctica, that warmer air is starting to mix in during the summer more than it used to. And, yeah, that would be quite serious in terms of projections for sea level rise.
Couldn't this whole scenario that you've just described be accelerated if this new data coming out of the University of East Anglia in Britain is correct, that, and I'm just going to summarize it and then ask you if you would comment on the implications. This was released on May 17th of 2007. The summary of what they have found is that the Southern Ocean around Antarctica is so loaded with carbon dioxide that it can barely absorb any more. So more of the gas, meaning the CO2, will stay in the atmosphere to warm up the planet further.
Yeah, it does have an impact on this melt rate, not just for the Antarctic, but all over the world. The atmosphere is very well mixed, and so the fact that the Southern Ocean can't absorb CO2 the way it used to means that the rate of increase throughout the atmosphere that we've seen measured accurately since the 1950s, that rate will begin to steepen. We'll get more greenhouse gas in the atmosphere faster. And that means that when you look down the road for the next century, as the IPCC did, and they looked at several models of how greenhouse gases could impact climate and could impact various systems, rainfall, surface temperature, ice melt, the scenarios that included a more rapid increase of CO2 that were considered the extreme cases are going to be closer to the likely cases if we really do begin to see a steeper increase in greenhouse gases because the ocean can't absorb as much CO2 as it used to. Now, the Southern Ocean is a big area. It's not the entire ocean. However, it's the one that you'd expect would absorb the most CO2 because the surface waters are quite cold. There are other things that occur in the Southern Ocean. There's a huge ecosystem in the Southern Ocean that absorbs carbon from the atmosphere biologically and forms in the process of plankton growing. And when those plankton die, they sink to the ocean bottom and they sequester. They take the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere with them to the ocean bottom. So there's a very complex picture behind the whole carbon balance story that the atmosphere and the Earth have. And so I guess I take a wait-and-see attitude towards whether or not CO2 levels will start to increase more steeply as a result of this near-saturated condition that's been reported for the Southern Ocean.
But isn't it true that the Southern Ocean accounts for 15% of the global carbon sink? And if it has filled up now, or nearly so, doesn't that mean that other regions of the ocean must be almost full of CO2 as well?
I think that's a plausible guess and may well be the case. I think I'd want to see a study that considered how the rest of the carbon system is going to react to more CO2 in the atmosphere, to a saturated Southern Ocean, before I really leapt out and said, we'll see a carbon dioxide increase at this or that rate. I think we'd need to take a look at some of the other systems on Earth and how they're behaving. There are also human things that are going to have an impact on this. How fast do China and India modernize and electrify? And will we be able to convince them to do things like sequester carbon dioxide at power plants or use alternate energy sources, as I hope the Western world begins to do? Maybe that will change the carbon balance in a different way. So, again, I think what they're saying is definitely cause for concern, but making a prediction that we'll have that more extreme CO2 by the end of the century, it's still a bit premature, but that's what their study implies.
The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 2007 laid out that there could be an average global temperature warming on this planet between now and the next 90 years between 3 degrees and 11.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit over the next 90 years would be 3 times the warming of the last century's 100 years. What is the worst case in your educated mind about what could happen to the weather around this planet?
Oh, boy. Well, first of all, it can't be any more urgent. The problem that we're facing couldn't be any more urgent. Everywhere we turn, as a polar scientist, we're seeing that the progress of global warming is proceeding faster than we thought it was. We had a recent study from NSIDC that showed that sea ice is retreating faster than we thought it would for this level of CO2. Similarly, we're seeing a response in Greenland, extensive melt. Now we're seeing Antarctica, which had up to now been mostly isolated except for the peninsula. We can't have more urgency or clearer data that the time to begin to act is now. What's the ultimate consequence for climate in the world? I think what you'll see are several areas seriously impacted in terms of their ability to grow food, their ability to get water to all of the folks that live there. Which areas exactly will that be? It's hard to say. Different models show different scenarios, but the potential for having drought in the Southwest, drought in Southeast Asia, one of the great growing regions of the world, one of the great bread baskets or rice baskets of the world, failing to deliver a crop sufficient to feed everybody. These are real possibilities by the second half of this century. And we've got to begin to act now, or we're going to have a titanic refugee problem. Dislocations, the people dislocations, is going to be a huge pressure on the wealthy nations to try and adapt or defend. There'll be security-related issues against this pressure that's being put on by climate change occurring throughout the world. Science is doing the best job it can to tell people that we see the early warning signs and we see them clearly, and the prospects for the future are not good. We don't want to consider all of the negative things that might happen. We know that we're in for a big, big change, and in general, change is expensive, and in some cases, deadly. So what we're going to need to do is start to act now to turn this around.
But the CO2 blanket that now surrounds the Earth and is causing the warming that we have been discussing is not going to change for 200 years, even if India and China stop pumping CO2 into the atmosphere, or the United States or England tomorrow. We are stuck with a very thick CO2 blanket, and several scientists that I have talked to in 2007 who are atmospheric physicists say it's already, from their point of view, too late. That what the political urgency is beginning to form now in 2007 should have happened 25 years ago.
The idea that it's too late ignores the fact that if we don't begin to do something now, it only gets worse, and the changes only get worse. The cost of it only gets worse. So you say it's too late, and what you're saying is it's too late for the status quo. The status quo is going to change. Fine. How much is it going to change by? Well, a little or a lot. Let's make it a little and try now to find these alternative energy sources.
At the current measured rate of CO2 increase and consequential warming incrementally over, let's say, just the next decade, do you think it is fair to say that we should be prepared for more Katrinas and more F5 tornadoes like the one that just devastated Greensburg, Kansas?
In the next 10 years.
Right.
That would be my guess, that there will be more of those. That's about as far as I'll go.
And the insurance companies are already withdrawing insurance support from coastal areas, especially in Florida. It's expected that most people with any homes on coasts are no longer going to be able to get any insurance. What kind of pressure do you think that will do?
Those are going to be real economic costs for not doing anything. Now, you're absolutely right. They're going to have to adapt anyway. We're going to have to figure out a way out of this with a certain amount of warming and increase in CO2 anyway over the next 50 years. But not acting upon the signals that we're seeing now and the impacts that we're seeing now means that the situation gets worse by the end of the century and in the century after that. I personally want to be able to say to my grandkids that we took a big step when we saw it happening during one generation, that we were impacting global climate, that we began to address the problem. We can't solve it all in one generation, but we began to address the problem. To look at your grandkids and say, yeah, we knew this was likely to happen, but we didn't do anything about it because it would cost too much, and to watch their world crumble, I think people are going to feel, they're going to wish that they'd done something rather than face that.
If we don't do something to curtail the amount of increase of CO2 and other greenhouse gases from 2007 forward into this century, will there be urban and rural populations right now that will become unlivable, that there will have to be movement away from vast areas that are now populated?
Absolutely. That is probably the greatest threat, is the dislocation of billions of people by changes in climate and changes in sea level. It presents a security risk, presents an economic risk, it presents a humanitarian threat as well.
And animals and plants.
That's true, too. The impacts are likely to be severe. I don't know. You can take the attitude that let the next century sort itself out. Nobody told us what the world was going to be like when we came into it. But the idea that we're making it tougher on later generations, tougher to support a world of 6, 8, 10 billion people, that bugs me. And it bugs me because we know what's coming. We know it's only going to get worse if we continue to do what we do. In the face of that information, and in the face of clear evidence in the polar regions and in the tropics from storms, if we don't do anything, I think we've failed morally. What we've seen when we compare what's happened over the past 50 years with what the models show, which matched the last century fairly well until the last decade or two, and into this coming century, we're seeing in several different venues of climate analysis, in fact, we're already on a fast track for climate change. Things are proceeding more rapidly than we thought they would. The Earth may, in fact, be more sensitive to CO2 increases than we thought. And once again, yes, we're in for a certain amount of warming. There's a certain amount that we're committed to no matter what. Sooner we begin to address this, the fewer problems we'll have by the end of the next century and into the following century. We have to get this under control, or we have to admit that the world will become chaotic in another century and accept that. And I'm not willing to accept that, and I don't think anybody is. While there are many scenarios where the world may come to an end, both religious and by the hand of man, it's up to us to do the best we can while we're here, and to do the best with a new perspective on what our actions mean to the future. In the past, people didn't have to think like this. The world was huge. It was bottomless as far as we could tell in terms of its resources and its ability to support us. And what we did in one generation didn't affect later generations. They had a fair shot at chopping down their own trees or building their own railroads or creating their own cities. That's not the case anymore. This world has a limited carrying capacity, and if we're not careful with it, that carrying capacity will go sharply downward. And that means millions of people will be dislocated, millions of people will die. I don't think that's something that we can conscience doing any longer. Now, do we go broke trying to fix it? I don't think we have to. I think small changes now, and particularly clever economic incentives, can get us to use the skills that we have in terms of innovation and the capitalist economy that we have to turn this around fairly fast. But what we can't tolerate is inaction. Then we're definitely committed to a much greater pain and suffering in the long run.
One action that is currently underway to help balance out the Earth's carbon dioxide release and absorption is going to put iron into the waters around the Galapagos Islands in the Pacific Ocean. The test is to see if the iron will stimulate plankton growth. Without enough iron, plankton photosynthesis is very weak. The organizer behind this iron research is the eco-restoration group called Planktos. If this test in 2007 worked, then iron seeding of vast ocean areas might increase plankton growth. That would help feed marine life, and more plankton will also take in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. When the plankton die and sink to the ocean bottom, as Dr. Scambos was just describing in the South Ocean, the dead plants will take CO2 with them, sequestering CO2 in the organic matter of the plants at the bottom of the water. The more CO2 that can be sequestered underwater, the less will escape to the atmosphere, where a blanket of carbon dioxide keeps getting thicker and thicker around our planet. And Whitley, when you sit here in May of 2007 and hear somebody who is as well educated and respected as Dr. Scambos speak with the urgency that he is speaking, and knowing that so many other scientists now who are the directors of institutions around the world are speaking with the same kind of urgency, I cannot understand why there is not a galvanizing emergency at every political level.
Well, because there's a lack of galvanizing leadership at any political level, especially the presidency. The United States has failed miserably in this. China has failed miserably in this. England has failed somewhat less miserably. Most countries are simply ignoring it, even still to this day. And what he didn't say was that the sudden and unexpected melts and the intensity of the melt in Greenland suggests that some of these glaciers are going to give way big time. And we're going to have...
Antarctica?
I mean, he mentioned Greenland only in passing. I know that, but I am referring specifically to the glaciers in Greenland, not Antarctica, because the ones in Antarctica still appear to be more stable. But if those glaciers give way either in Greenland or Antarctica, we're going to see extraordinary rises in sea levels. That's the real reason that insurance companies are pulling out of the coastal areas, even coastal areas without much hurricane danger. So, Linda, we have to pull out ourselves right now. And, folks, I want to thank you, as always, for listening. I think is this energy.
And what we're becoming, right now.
What are we becoming, Barbara?
Well, we are evolving into another whole level of the human species. And in the Mayan code, I looked at a slit in the evolutionary line. If you go back through the evolution of hominids, you'll see certain strains evolving through levels that eventually became humans. And then you'll find these other strains of hominids just going out of existence. And I'm positing in the Mayan code that what 2011-2012 is really about is that we're going to have a split in our evolutionary line. And one of the lines that's going to split off is what I call Homo aggressus, which is the warlike human. And that we are going to be evolving into the next level, which is Homo pacem, which is the human of peace, and they're peaceful human. And this is if this is true, and I believe that it's true because I think otherwise we're not going to survive. All of us have to face all of the fears and emotional complexes that we've lived with for thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. So we're just going through this just incredible level of clearance right now of emotional patterns. And one of the feel deep compassion for fundamentalists, and I'm grateful to feel compassion. They don't make me mad, because I feel so much compassion for them because I think I understand the emotional complexes that they're attempting to process.
And attempting to process it, unfortunately, through the lure of the Pharisee, in both the Muslim and the Christian worlds. In the Christian world, it's quite obvious the connection between corporate America and industrial Christianity, as I call it, is a fatal one for the Christian spirit, because it twists Christ's message around backwards and says it's to be rich and to push away the poor.
Yes, exactly. And I feel a great feeling of justice in what you say, but I also do feel compassion as I see them struggling with their inner fears and their inner demons.
Yes.
If you know what I mean. And I think, like, for example, I even feel compassion toward George Bush. And that's because I read a book called Bush on the Couch, where he was psychoanalyzed by a very good analyst. And in other words, I feel like one of the things we've got to do right now is we've got to go into people in
physical and psychic field.
Okay, well, as you know, this is a complicated question. But
yes, I know. That's why I gave you time.
Yeah, I know. But according to astronomy, in other words, we're talking science and not what I call New Age woo-woo. According to astronomy, our solar system went into a very special alignment with the center of the galaxy sometime during 1998. And different astronomers gave different dates, but they're all relatively close. And so those of us who are interested in, the issue of, like, the solar system and the galaxy, like in previous books, I've brought up the issue that what's happening for us as humans is we're becoming galactocentric instead of heliocentric. In other words, in 1600 AD, we realized that we were going around the sun, the planets are going around the sun, and we had a sense of a solar-based reality. But now what's happening is we're orienting ourselves within the galaxy itself. And so when this alignment occurred, only a few people the astronomers were watching it. But only a few New Age researchers, consciousness researchers, were watching to see what was going on. And so fortunately for me, I was on top of that one, and there were actual physical changes on our planet when this alignment occurred, one of which was a bulge appeared at the equator of the Earth. And for the first time in 11,500 years, the land near the poles stopped rising in relationship to the equator, and the equator started to actually develop a bulge. Now, this could be seen from satellites in space. Now, the fact that the Earth actually went through a noticeable change, and then the other thing that happened during 1998 is there were some extraordinary gamma ray bursts that were just of unbelievable magnitude. And so we do have, number one, most importantly, physical evidence that this galactic alignment is creating new fields on our planet and in our solar system, and that's extremely important. And then, of course, what I do with the Mayan code is then I go into many, many details about what I think those kinds of shifts are creating. And the most specific one being I'm following the research of a Swedish biologist, Carl Johan Kalaman, who has developed an evolutionary theory regarding the Mayan calendar itself, which is what I call the Mayan code. And so according to Kalaman, we went through a major evolutionary leap in January of 1999. And in January of 1999, our consciousness actually accelerated 20 times faster than it was going from 1755 to 2011 AD. And so the critical thing to understand is, first of all, the shift occurred at the physical level in the galaxy and in the solar system. And then when this particular change in the Mayan calendar came through in January of 99, my theory is that we were physically prepared on our planet to handle the next stage of acceleration, which is called the galactic underworld. And the galactic underworld is 12.8 short years from 1999 through 2011 AD, when we are going through an evolutionary shift, Whitley, that's like equivalent to when the fish came out of the sea and started walking on the land, or when the various stages of hominid evolution occurred. And so in this case, this shift is consciousness. This shift has to do with moving back into vibratory resonance with our planet. We've been knocked out of vibratory resonance with our planet because of a series of evolutionary cycles.
Now, we have lost contact with our souls, you say. But I want to touch on something.
And Whitley, you can define your soul as vibratory resonance with the earth.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so that's exactly what it is. If we're out of vibratory resonance with our home, which is our planet, then we're out of resonance with our own souls. And what has happened, in a sense, is we have lost that connection with our souls. And then, in a sense, you could say we could think of ourselves as like the fallen angels, if you want to do that,
Like the falling angels, I always...
Falling, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk a little bit about... And by the way, you can get into this deeply in two ways. First, you can get Barbara's book, The Mayan Code. Her new book is just terrific, and it's available. I think it's available through unknowncountry.com, through our land, of her new and quite astonishing book, The Mayan Code, Time Acceleration and the Awakening of the World Mind. It is happening, believe you me. I read this book in manuscript, and I said this at that time, and you'll find it on the back of the book. Barbara Hand Clows has written the definitive book about 2012. This book, quite simply, is the best resource that now exists. A very wise human being has poured her heart, her soul, and her mind into these words. The Mayan Code is a great gift to us all, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. We are all struggling to understand what is happening and what is going to happen over the next 5 years. Barbara is probably one of the best placed people in the world to help us. So, Barbara, I would like to welcome you once again to Dreamland. And by the way, folks, before we go on, I just want to mention that William is going to be talking to Barbara in the subscriber section, and it's going to be a fascinating, in-depth interview with some very surprising material, so don't miss it. Hello, Barbara. How are you?
Whitley, how are you?
Well, it's great to have you back with us, Barbara. It has been, I still vividly remember some of our interviews. I'll never forget the interview on catastrophobia. I thought that book was one of the most insightful books I have really ever encountered about the human past.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that book is that catastrophobia is that I could not have written the Mayan Code unless I had brought catastrophobia in first, because it's like catastrophobia becomes a little piece in the Mayan code, and yet it is the essential piece because it explains what's wrong with us. It explains why we're so traumatized and incapable of dealing with the stages of evolution that we're now literally being pushed to move through. And so thank goodness I got it done. You know what I mean? Because I couldn't have written this book unless I'd gotten that piece in.
And we are traumatized. The rise of fundamentalisms around the world, in the Christian world, in the Muslim world, and in the Hindu world too, to a great, surprising extent that we don't read about, but it's quite true, are a symptom of the problem of our inability to face what we really are and
understand the way their minds are working so that we can actually assist them to let go of some of the anger and some of the violence.
Well, you mentioned compassion a number of times already, and I think it's a critically important word because the visitors showed me when I was in the process of learning, sort of going to school with them, two worlds, one a little worse off than ours and one a little better off than ours. Mm-hmm. And the one that was a little worse off had degenerated completely into a culture of blame. And in October, I believe, of 1997, it self-destructed, and it still hasn't come back to life. Yeah. The other one had evolved into a culture of compassion, mm-hmm. which was defined as a culture which sought to do for each person what they needed the most.
Yeah.
And we think, of course, since we're in a culture of blame, that, compassion is no good, because that just means people don't get punished, and we're really into punishing people.
Yeah.
However, a real culture of compassion recognizes what they actually need, whether it is punishment, support, or a mixture of those things, and gives it to them. It is nurturing rather than destructive.
Yeah, that's a great definition, because you're a father and I'm a mother, and sometimes with our kids we do have to punish them because it's exactly what they need at that moment. And it's always the most painful part of being a parent, but there are times. Well,
and children who don't get the focus of boundaries are angry always. When I see parents saying to their children, well, what do you think? Do you think that this was bad? That you hurt her or hurt him? The child doesn't know. That's the whole point. The child needs to be told. They need the boundaries. And once they have the boundaries, they begin to be able to build a conscience. But, Barbara, let's go on now. I want to get into the book a little bit, and I want to think the blessed place to start is this, for you to describe the alignment to the center of the Milky Way that occurred in 1998. You say it has fundamentally altered the physical and psychic field of our planet. We're into the nitty-gritty in this show. We've got plenty of time. What happened and exactly how did it alter our physical